Buchanan. Please be seated. Scripture reading this morning is Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 4. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you of a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran.
So a tall, slender old man with a pointy hat comes to your door, and he says that he knows friends who need help getting their gold back from a greedy, fire-breathing dragon. Or a giant busts down your door and tells you that you're a wizard and have been invited to school, where you will learn how to use your abilities. A man in a plain brown robe with a lightsaber comes to your planet and tells you that he wants you to be a Jedi Knight so that you can take down the Empire. A mysterious figure with reflective glasses offers you a red pill that will let you see the world as it really is, and with the only other alternative being that you do not even know that the conversation ever happened. So perhaps you are not as familiar with these stories, but you may know others like them. All of these stories, more or less, have the same structure with some deviances. They follow what Joseph Campbell called the monomyth, which is what many call the hero's journey. You might have, if you're in high school, you probably learned this in your sophomore English classes, and it looks something like this, and you probably can't read every detail. I definitely can't from this distance. But if you just look up the hero's journey, you'll see this circle, where you can see how it's an archetypal story where you can just plot the different plot points of what the hero does in the story. And we know so many stories, and I just listed 4 earlier accounts, and you probably knew them before, but you maybe not have recognized how similar they were. Whether it be The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, or The Matrix, whatever it may be, these stories are very much based on the same sort of structure, especially at the beginning. And at the beginning of each of these stories, we have the hero's call to adventure. It's when the mentor figure or some other mysterious figure comes to them and tells them about this adventure that they must go on, whether it be a princess to be rescued, an empire to be saved, or a dragon to be slain. It's some sort of call to do something more than just sit in your house. And so today we are going to look at possibly one of the most important and momentous calls to adventure ever recorded. And it is in Genesis chapter 12, where Abraham is called to leave everything that he has ever known and go to an unfamiliar place. And if you think about how this story fits into not only the story of the Bible, but also into human history, it is probably the most significant call to adventure that has impacted humankind. And so there are 3 major goals to this sermon. The first is to contemplate the magnitude of this story's importance for the Bible and how this story very much sets the base for and the start of the progression toward the Messiah. And the second major goal is to examine what this call meant for Abraham's life, both in what he had to risk when he left, but also what he had to gain. The third major goal of this sermon is to put ourselves in Abraham's shoes, to see ourselves as sons and daughters of Abraham, and also to see ourselves in the grand story of redemption in the Bible. So with these 3 major goals, let's get into the text. So let's please turn to Genesis chapter 11. I know it said Genesis chapter 12, but I think that knowing a little bit of the background behind Abraham's family will help us in the story. So turn to Genesis chapter 11 and start reading at verse 27. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah and in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren. She had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to the land of Canaan. And they went to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed from as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions, and they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to the land of Canaan. And Abram passed through the land from the place of Shechem as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel. And he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west of Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. So Abram journeyed, going still onward toward the Negev, or the south. So here we have this story of the family of Terah. And before this story, we are presented with this family of Shem and also with this famous story of the Tower of Babel. And in that story, we have this group of people that it says all the land was gathered into one place. Instead of being fruitful and multiplying and scattering throughout the earth, they instead were trying to centralize all of the people around, and they decided to build this tower, and they said, "Let's make a great name for ourselves." And because they were so arrogant and wanting to make this name for themselves by building this tower, God came down and he frustrated their plans and scattered them and confused their language. And so we see later that Terah's descendants come from the descendants of those who were at Babel. And so Terah and his family are living in Ur of the Chaldeans, and this is where we'll start our lesson, is thinking about where Abram started out at. What is the geographical location of Abram? And you might not be able to see it very super clearly or read all the names on this map, but if you look down toward the bottom, you see this red circle with maybe lines under it. I underlined this, and that is Ur, or a possible location of Ur. There's another one actually more central to Haran, where Abram moves to, but it's possible that he came from this area down here, way down here in southern Mesopotamia. And so if he came from there, Terah then traveled. It said he was going to Canaan. That's what Genesis 12 says. It says in Genesis 11, in verse 31, it says, "And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot and the son of Haran and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and stayed there. And so they never actually reached the destination of Canaan at this point. They instead decided, we're going to stop. We're going to stop here and stay in Haran. And so, what do we know about this place? What is significant about it? And, it's this city, especially at the time of Abraham, it was very old, as you can imagine, that several thousands of years ago. So we know mostly stuff from archaeology, and occasionally there are some tablets left over where we can read a little bit about the city. But we do know a couple of big things. And one of the biggest things that we can know that's significant for our story is that it was a center of religion for the moon god named Sin. Spelled S-I-N, like sin, but it's not the same concept as sin for us. So it was a main center, and significantly, Ur, the city where they moved from, was also the major center, the place where the main temple to this god was, to this god Sin, the moon god in Babylon. So some Jewish traditions, they say that Abraham's father Terah was actually maybe an idol maker, or was a part of the maybe priesthood or people who worshipped the moon god. And whether this tradition is correct or not, we do not know, but it's reasonable to say if they moved from one locale to the next where this was a significant religious city, then it could be possible. And we do know from Joshua 24 in verse 2 that Abram's family served other gods while in Ur and Haran. But also another thing that we can think about is about the place of Abram's location is not just this geographical place, but also the place in his life where he was. How old does it say he was? Was he 18 going to college? Was he 30 going on to a career change? No, he was 75 years old when God called him out of Haran to go to this promised land. He was beyond retirement age, where many of us are thinking, we don't have ambitions in our lives anymore. He is well established in his town or his city, and where all his family are. So he is not just in a place where possibly his family is doing well, but also he's old. What business does he have to get out, to go on this adventure, this journey that God has called him to go on? It sounds absurd. And also another place in his life where he was is that he was called to go to this land and that he'd be a great nation, but also he didn't have any children. He was childless. He had no heirs. And so presumably his heir, I believe he says in Genesis 15, is Eliezer of Damascus. And we don't know who that person is. It could be some sort of nickname for someone else that we know in the Bible, but we don't know with any certainty who this person is, and he probably might not even be journeying with Abram. But we can see that Abram is not what you call, someone who is cut out to be a hero, you would think, at least by his characteristics. He's an idol-worshiping old man. Not someone who you think would be, without a child, not someone who you think would start a nation that would be exclusively serve the Lord. And so, I want you to think about this today, about this starting place. And allegorically thinking about ourselves is, what place are you at, or what place were you at when God called you out to go on your spiritual adventure, so to speak, to go on this journey with him throughout life? God can call you in any circumstance. You don't have to be young. You don't have to be able-bodied. God took Abram and he worked a miracle through him. He made a nation, a nation out of a barren couple. what can God do with your life? And I know that people can be maybe in a down part of their lives, a low, where they don't feel like there's any real prospects for them in the future. But whenever I read this story and I read about a 75-year-old man without any children, I can see how there's always hope for us at any time in our lives, where God can sustain us to live even longer, where God can do great things through us, even in our old age, even in our barrenness, even in our weakness. So where are you, or where were you when you started? And I hope that you can think about what God has done through you, or what he can still do through you today when he calls you to his higher calling in his son Jesus. And so Abraham was at a difficult starting place, but also he's also called to sacrifice some, right? He's told, get out from your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land I will show you. And I don't think we always fully understand how difficult this would be. People, unlike today, they're not as mobile, perhaps, as you like to think. Maybe we think of Abraham as nomadic. He has all these flocks, and you have to go to different fields, but that doesn't mean you have to move different locales where you're ruled under different people. It's a very hard and difficult thing to do. And I think Hebrews chapter 11, if we turn there to Hebrews chapter 11 and looking at verse 8, we can see this struggle, this difficulty in Abraham's life, how hard this call was, and how much faith it took him. So starting in Hebrews 11 in verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, first of all, not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, with the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And then going down to verse 13, said, these all died, the patriarchs all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, when assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had an opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So we can see that Abraham had to leave this place where he had already had established honor. And that's something we don't think about, is in an honor culture, we don't think about how he's leaving all his great status that he has, maybe as a son of the leading merchant, as a merchant family. And then he has to go to a place where he knows nobody, where he is at the bottom of the heap, where he has no rights as an alien or a stranger in the land. People could kill him, and they would not be punished for it, because might is right more in those days if you're just an illegal or just a stranger or a sojourner in a land. You had to depend upon the hospitality of people. And hopefully the hospitality they would grant to you would help you to live, but we see in Genesis chapter 14 some of the dangers there were to Abraham. We see that how Lot, Abram's nephew, who goes with him to Canaan, he is captured by these kings who are going out to war. They take all of Lot's property. That could have easily have happened to Abraham if God had not been with him. It was a dangerous situation to go out and venture beyond one's homeland. Think about today going and you already having established a family, and then going at age 75 and going to a third world country where it's war-torn and people are always at war, and they could easily take you, human traffic you, do whatever they want with you, kill you, take your money, take your property. That's what it was like for Abram here. That's the risk he had to take. And so he had to risk losing his honor, risk losing his reputation, risk losing his property, risk losing his life. Not only that, he had to trust God and have faith that God was going to fulfill what he had to promise him. God didn't just go in and say, I've already cleared out this land for you. It's all yours now. No, he said, go here and journey here, and I will give it to you at some indefinite point of time in the future. So Abraham had to sacrifice something by leaving his homeland. We can think about this in the stories that I mentioned earlier. Think about what, Frodo or Bilbo or Luke Skywalker or Neo, all these people sacrificed by going on and heeding this call. They sacrificed a relative life of comfort. Some heroes like Bilbo from the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, he went out reluctantly. He didn't at first want to. He wanted to stay in the comfort of his little cozy home, his little hole in the ground, and not have to go out into the dark world out and beyond. Abram could have easily done that same thing. He could have easily just not listened. For he had other gods he could have worshipped, other things he could put his faith in. But no, he decided to have faith in God. He decided to sacrifice these things in his life. And I hope that we are willing to count the cost, right? To count the cost of what it takes to go on this journey throughout the rest of our lives with God. It could cost us everything. But we have to have faith that God instead will give us even more in return. That it is worth the cost, ultimately at the end of our lives. So finally, we look to the more positive things, to the promise of inheritance, to the promise that this call to adventure will lead to some reward for Abram. And God did promise him a great thing. He says, and first, before I go into these promises, I want to think about how do these fit, and how do these fit into the Bible, into the grand narrative of Scripture. And one way that they could fit is how they reverse the effects of Genesis chapter 3. And if we think of, and I'm going in the teen class, going through Genesis 2 and 3 really slowly with them. And we talked last Wednesday about these curses, about the curses that mankind underwent because of their sinfulness, because of their disobedience to God's call. They didn't have blessing but curses. And so Abram and his family are the solution to this problem. Said God promises him several things. One of them is that God is going to give him seed, and this overcomes the hurdle or difficulty in childbearing and the loss of harmony between man and woman. The promise of the land is a hint that the ground will no longer be cursed. And the promise of blessing additionally shows that there will be harmony between Abram and those around him in his environment, so that the nations are going to be blessed through him. And he's going to be the source of God's blessing to all the earth. And so Abram, he is the solution primarily. And we do see how he is ultimately the solution. And because we see in Galatians chapter 3, it is through his seed, singular seed, Jesus Christ, that blessing goes out to all the world, that all these promises are fulfilled. And how throughout the Old Testament, how the whole larger state of Israel, how they have failed to be this blessing to the other nations. And so I want us to look, we can see how God has this plan for us, this plan for Abraham to become a blessing to everyone. And so let's think a little bit, go through these blessings one by one. One is that God is going to bless him by making him into a great nation. He would turn one man and his wife, his barren wife, into an empire where he says that they will be like the sand on the seashore. I believe it talks about that number in Genesis chapter 15 when God makes his covenant with him. We also see how God promises to bless him. And what does it mean to bless someone? Whenever someone sees, we say, bless you. Maybe we wish them well, or we wish them good health. But blessing from God is not just him wishing Abraham well. It's actually causing good things, causing him to succeed. By his very words, by his very utterance, he is causing Abraham to succeed. And by cursing people, God is causing them to fail. And so we can see this here in our story, that God is going to bless him and cause Abraham to succeed in whatever he does in life. And we see that ultimately in the story of Genesis of Abraham. Secondly, he's going to make his name great. If you think back to what I said a little bit earlier at the beginning of this lesson, in Genesis chapter 11, whenever the Tower of Babel was being thought up, what did the people say that they wanted? They said, let us make a name for ourselves, right? They wanted to establish themselves. They wanted to make their mark, leave their mark on the world. This is what we've made. We're going to be famous for this. But they ended up being scattered, and it ended up being a disaster. But here, whenever God says he will make your name great, not Abram, he's not going to make his own name great. God's going to make his name great. And so whenever we think that I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to establish this company, it's going to be one of the best companies in the state, or the country, or the world, or maybe you succeed. It isn't true success. God ultimately, in time and decay and death, ultimately frustrate this. Who remembers? Who remembers all these great things that happened in history? There's probably great businesses, great people, rich, wealthy people that have been long forgotten in the historical record. Their name went into oblivion. They thought they were making a name for themselves, but they weren't. I don't want us to make that same mistake today. I don't want us to think we can make a name for ourselves that will last, or that will really truly matter. The only person who can truly make our name great is God. We have to trust in him and his plan. And so the idea that we can, the postmodern theory that we can write our own adventure, write our own story, write our own meaning in life is false. God is the one who gives it. God is the one who distributes this greatness. And so God can make our name great just as he made Abram's name great. Also, he says that Abram will become a blessing to others. So it's not only that he can be blessed, but also that he is the source, the fountain, the pool of blessings where everyone will gather to. And we see this prophesied time and time again in the prophets. We look at Isaiah chapter 2. We see how all the nations are going to come to Zion and gather around it and hear the teachings of the law and submit to them. How exciting is that? But we never really see that in history until we get to Jesus Christ. Jesus is the one whom all blessings to the nations flow out from. Jesus is the one who blesses them all. The blessing of Abraham wasn't just to the Israelites. And Peter and the apostles realized that later, especially after God revealed it to him in the vision on top of a roof. Whenever he said that this mission is not just to the Israelites, but also to all the nations. And Paul wanted to spread this gospel to everywhere in the known world. So we need to think about how we become a blessing to others as Christians. We are these trees of life that other people can eat from, that other people can partake of, and they can be nourished by us. Because we are built upon the root of Jesus Christ. We are stemming and nourished from God himself. So we can be a blessing to others, just as Abram is a blessing and his family is. Because we are all children of Abraham. And finally, down in verse 7, he says that God is going to give Abram God gives Abram another promise that he's going to give this land to Abram's descendants. And this promise has been passed on to us, but is far greater than even God lets on in this chapter. Every Christian, as I said just a minute ago, is a child of Abraham. We see that in Galatians chapter 3, I believe in verse 7. If we turn there, he says, right, that therefore know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. If we have faith in God, we are his children. We are the heirs of this promise. And so, how do we inherit this land? Are we going to somehow inherit the state of Israel? No. And I think that's a mistake, that Jimmy Carter might have made in his presidency and how he interpreted these verses. But as for the land, our inheritance is not just the land of Canaan, but the kingdom of God, which that doesn't just encompass that land of Israel, that small plot of land, but also the entire world eventually, whenever it's all subject to Christ at the end of time. So the ultimate fulfillment of these promises is through Jesus. While the Old Testament really fleshes out the failure of all of Abraham's descendants in how they were supposed to inherit this land and rule it, we see that there is one descendant of Abraham who was able to fulfill this role. One descendant of Abraham who was true to God, who was truly the son of Abraham, who was able to bring life to everyone else, including the nations, and that was Jesus Christ. So finally, we get to the end of the lesson, and that is Abraham's obedience. And perhaps one of the most key aspects of the story is that sets him apart from many others is he's readily obedient to God's word, to God's promises. Imagine if all these stories, if Bilbo never left his house, Frodo never left the Shire, if Luke never left his home, if Neo never took that red pill. Imagine all these grand stories, they would be ended immediately. We wouldn't have movies or stories about them. We wouldn't know about Abraham either. So we need to be obedient. We need to respond to this call if we are going to live according to God's plan. God gave us a choice. God gave us freedom to choose whether or not we were to follow him. If Abraham didn't follow him, God probably knew of another who would follow him. Are you going to obey God? Are you going to trust him? Are you going to keep his promises with you as you journey through life? Likewise, we can think about how we are often distracted from obeying God, from looking forward to his great promises because of pain or pleasure in life. Pain can sometimes cloud how God is involved in our lives in keeping promises. Pain has caused people to turn away from God, to become atheists, or to turn towards some other sort of religion, some sort of other system to think about the world in, because they don't believe God, a loving God, could do these things. Pain can distract us from obeying him because we are angry at him. Likewise, pleasures, or even the fulfillment of God's promises in our lives, can keep us from being loyal to God. We may end up loving the blessings of God even more than we love God himself. This is why Job, at least in the prologue to Job in chapters 1 and 2, Satan came to the Lord and said, Job only serves you because you give him all this nice stuff. I'm sure if he didn't have this stuff, he wouldn't serve you. Now God could have been like, yeah, you will. Trust me on it. But no, he tests Job. He tests Job, and Job has everything taken away from him. And even though Job struggles, he ends up still remaining faithful to God. And Abraham almost lost his son God told him that he was going to take away his son. The promise that he said, God said he was going to give him a son. And yet Abraham still, even though it didn't make sense, why would God take away the promise that he'd given to him? Abraham had faith in God. That even that he didn't trust in Isaac. He didn't trust that Isaac was going to be this thing. He trusted in God alone. The Hebrews writer says that he believed that God could raise up Isaac from the dead, if that's what it meant, because he trusted God that much that he would have sacrificed his son. So finally, are we going to trust God this much? Are we going to let his blessings or the pain of life distract us from this call? Because if we are all true sons of Abraham, we are going to have faith in him. All Christians are called to this marvelous adventure in Christ. And we will walk through life with him as our guide and our mentor. And we may have already taken this initial step out of our sinful homeland, out of idolatry, of worshiping money, pleasure, ourselves, to worshiping the one true God. But we can see how it isn't always going to be comfortable for us after this initial step. Abraham, he had many troubles in his life. Even though God calls him ultimately to succeed, God tested him time and time again. And sometimes even Abraham failed. As we see, he failed pretty soon whenever he went to the land of Egypt, whenever there was a famine in Genesis chapter 12. Are you willing to step back out of your comfort zone and willing to have faith that God will take care of you through the dangers of life? And I want you to think today, reflect this afternoon as you drive home, as you eat, or as you sit in your house. What is God calling me to do? Is there something hard that he's going to call me to do? And I want you to think about it through the lens of Abraham. Am I going to be like him? Am I going to step out in this adventure and trust God? And the thing is Hebrews 11 tells us about him because he's an example of what it's like. If we trust God, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it for us. And I think that we need to think about that. To think about how, man, it worked out for Abraham. And it's going to work out even better for us today. And even if we die, God's going to raise us again. And we're going to get our inheritance, our full inheritance then, at the end of time when Christ comes back. If you have not responded initially to God's call, though, you have a chance to do that. You have a chance to become a child of God by putting your faith in Jesus Christ, by being baptized into his name. So you can do that today. So my question for you today, as we sing this invitation song, is will you take this step? Will you heed this call to adventure?